The government made its case for an extension on legislation for doctor-assisted dying, pleading that it needs more time to come up with a new law. The government was supposed to have come up with legislation by next month, but the committee being struck to study the issue hasn't even started their work yet. Here's a look at where the case has gone to date. Back in 1972, the act of attempted suicide was decriminalized. In February of 2015, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in favor of doctor-assisted death and gives Parliament 1 year to enact new laws. In December of 2015, the Liberals request a 6-month extension. What we don't know is whether or not the court will approve that or when that might happen. February 6th is the deadline for the Supreme Court had initially given. And of course, February 26th, the full 20 days later, is when the Special Joint Committee is supposed to report back with their recommendations. And August would be when the extension period would conclude that the government's asking for right now. Wow, that's a lot of time in between. A complicated issue, though. So what's taking so long and what's at stake? Steven Fletcher is a former Conservative cabinet minister and MP who had a devastating accident that rendered him a quadriplegic. He is in favor of doctor-assisted death, but also understands some of those complications that can plague governments from the inside, and he joins us now from Winnipeg. Mr. Fletcher, thank you for joining us. I'd ask you your thoughts on the arguments that the government's making. Do you think the Supreme Court should grant them an extension?
Well, I understand why the government would be making the argument for an extension. Forming a new government, gaining power, does cause a lot of upheaval in Ottawa and in the legislative process. However, the Supreme Court has ruled. It's pretty clear on what the framework will be. Provinces have come up with guidelines through their various colleges of physicians and surgeons. And in Quebec, they're ready to go right away. So if there was an extension, two things would have to happen. Either Quebec would have to be exempt from the criminal code, which is bizarre, and I don't even know if it's constitutional, or the old law will take effect for another 6 months, and all the efforts that have occurred in Quebec and across the country will be for naught, at least for that period of time. So giving an extension may not be in the interests of anyone, actually. The Supreme Court may be doing the government a favor by not giving the extension. Legislation can always be passed down the road. The main thing will be around the criminal aspects to make sure that there aren't abuses. So I think that it would probably be best to move forward within the comprehensive framework of the Supreme Court, which, by the way, used a lot of the same language that was in my private member's bill when I introduced them to the House of Commons last year on this issue. So there's checks and balances in that legislation and in the framework that the Supreme Court presented.
Have you ever had the sense that there's a chance the government might pick up some of those private members' bills that you'd introduced? All of the work is done on them. They've already been written. Is there a possibility you think we could see that legislation introduced?
It's possible, but the meat of the legislation is already going to be the law of the land because the Supreme Court included the wording in their decision. Now, there are two bills that I think the government would be wise to consider. One was a review after every 5 years to come out with best practices, gather data, statistics. Why would people ask for physician-assisted death? What other resources can we provide as Canadians, be it palliative care, home care, pain relief, so on and so forth. In regard to the length of time between when the request is made, and the action taken, I think is an interesting question. And also, is it 14 days or maybe 14 years ahead of a situation? And what about the issue of power of attorney? Who would have authority in that situation? And there are also issues around the living wills. Insurance law will need to be adapted to deal with this. Will it be considered a suicide or a natural death? I would argue strongly should be a natural death. So there are lots of other issues, but they can be all done in time, and the Supreme Court decision can stand on its own.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Fletcher. I know this is an issue you're passionate about. We appreciate your expertise and your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The government is striking a parliamentary committee on physician-assisted dying to study the issue and come up with recommendations. But so far, they've done exactly nothing. But Power Play has learned the names of the senators and MPs who are on that committee. And here they are for the government. You can see there René Arsenault, Julie Dabruzin, Denis Lemieux, John Aldag, Rob Oliphant, and Brendan Shanahan. For the Conservatives, Michael Cooper from Alberta and Mark Warwa from British Columbia, as well as Stephen Blaney from Quebec. And for the NDP, Murray Rankin from BC and Brigitte Sanssouci. So there you go. Those are the MPs who are on the committee. That's the first time we have seen their names. Again, CTV's Power Play has obtained that list. So maybe that committee can get to work now that all the names are in with the clerk. For more on what lies ahead for this special joint committee, Senator James Cowan joins me now from Halifax. And of course, he is actually on that committee. A lot of people wondering what's taking so long to get this off the ground, Senator.
Well, you've given me the names of the members of the House of Commons. That's the first I've heard those. The Senate passed a resolution in mid-December and named in the resolution the 5 senators who will be on the committee. So those names have been known since mid-December, and we've been waiting for the House of Commons to move and to identify their members, and so now the committee can get to work.
Do you have a sense of what happens to this committee's work if the Supreme Court says, no, we're not granting an extension? Will the committee still go forward, or does that make it moot?
Well, if the extension is not granted, then that means that the committee's got to do its work in a very short period of time, and that would, I think, make it very difficult for the committee to do a proper job of consultation, which is what the government said it wanted the Joint Committee to do. We were asked in mid-November, I think, to if we were prepared to participate in the committee, and both Senator Carignan and I, as the leaders of the 2 major caucuses in the Senate, readily agreed at that time, and we named our members, as I say, in December.
I'm curious to know, and let's bring up those names again just so our viewers can have another look at them again. CTV's Power Play has learned these names. These is the first time you're having a look at who's going to be on this committee. Do you have a sense, Senator, of how this is going to work? I think perhaps a lot less partisan than a lot of committees, because there's not really a clear left-right issue when it comes to this. There's people in all parties who have different feelings about it.
Well, this shouldn't be a partisan issue at all. It is an issue. Mr. Fletcher outlined a number of the serious concerns, and certainly your viewers will be well aware of the difference of the broad spectrum of opinion on this issue. It's a very serious issue. I think the idea of having a joint Senate House of Commons committee to advise the government on the framework for legislation is an excellent one, and I don't think it should be a partisan issue. We need to listen very carefully to the views of Canadians, because this is an issue which cuts very close to the bone for many Canadians, and we have to be very careful that the legislative solution that we propose or advise the government to propose is as good a compromise as we can come up with. It's clear that no legislative solution will achieve universal approval. It's just too divisive an issue for that. But it shouldn't be a partisan issue. I don't see it being a politically partisan issue. But there are widely differing and firmly held views on this issue, as you know.
Do you have a sense of what your schedule will look like? I know you just found out those names. Now they're in to the clerk, which means you can start to move forward. How quickly does work begin? Are we talking this week, next week? Because even if this extension is granted, you still really only have until August to try to put something together, it sounds like.
Exactly. As I say, we had the first inclination we had was a letter of invitation from Minister LeBlanc in mid or late November to me and to Senator Carignan. We both responded saying that we would participate, and then we waited, and there was some confusion, I think, or some disagreement amongst the parties in the House of Commons as to how to proceed or whether to proceed, and it was on again, off again until I think in the first week of December, and then we heard that it was a go as far as the House of Commons was concerned. They passed a resolution. We passed a resolution, and I've had no further contact with anybody since then. I did attempt to find out today where matters stood, whether there were organizational meetings of the committee set, or what the meeting schedule would be, and I was not able to obtain any information today.
Still sounds like there's a lot to be done before the real work, which will be very challenging, can begin. Senator Cowan, thank you much for joining us today from Halifax.